Plugin of the week is the Softube Tape plugin. Tape is a new plugin by Softube, and hence the name. And it's pretty straightforward, really simple plugin. Offers 3 tape types. These are 3 tape machine types, although you don't see that change here. What they qualify it is as a Swiss tape machine. That's a Studer tape machine. The B tape machine is transformer based, what they call it. I would guess that's an ATR based on the sound, because that's probably most famously known for its transformers. And on the C, I'm a little bit of a question mark. They qualify it as a British tape machine, and probably most of the British tape machines that were made by EMI, and that could be a number of different tape machines coming from that era. You know, Abbey Road. Most of the other tape machines, there are some. I think Telefunken made one. There's another one called BTR. So, you know, it could be, but Telefunken is Germany, so British specifically. It's probably coming from Abbey Road Studios. Whatever the tape machines, you get basically 3 flavors. You have an amount control that determines the amount of tape saturation. The metering here generally shows input-output level, but you can actually have it display harmonic distortion, so you can actually see a meter that will go in the negative direction to show you your THD levels. And you have a tape speed, which goes from 30, 15, 7.5, and then as you can see here, you start to get towards noise here at 3 and 3/4 and 1 7/8. So when you get that, that's more like dialogue type of stuff when you need a reel to run for a very long period of time. You know, when they, old days when they used to do interrogations, they have a tape running. They want it going for like 3 hours on a reel. You'd run it at that speed. If you hit the remote control section here, it opens up some additional controls. So wherever you place the plugin, you have wet-dry capability. So if you oversaturate it or distort it, which you fully have the capability of doing, you can go to the wet-dry control to balance that out. They also have a really cool control here, which is a what they call speed stability. Now, there are 2 basic characteristics that come in tape machines, wow and flutter. Wow is variation in the speed of the tape as it's pulling through the mechanism. There are lots of things that can cause this inconsistency, but it actually creates a shift in the pitch, which acts somewhat like a vibrato kind of effect. And then there is flutter, which is the tape as it passes across the heads can sometimes move up and down by subtle amounts because of the unevenness of the cut or inconsistency of the guide rollers that sort of bring the tape through. And that movement up and down takes the actual where the signal is recorded on the tape itself and kind of puts it slightly out of alignment with the tape, with the head gaps for those individual tracks, and that changes the volume. And so, but it sounds like and what you'll see here is that this is primarily a wow control or a vibrato, because it does affect the pitch movement, and you can exaggerate it. There's also a general trim for high frequency and low frequency, so you can actually, or take high frequencies, you could trim them or boost them, so that gives you some extra ability. And then there's a crosstalk control. When you're working with a stereo instantiation, like I'll demonstrate here, this will kind of mono the signal. This is an actual real-world thing that happens because the signal is recorded magnetically. As you would know, magnetic fields, they radiate. So they spread outward, so they don't stay within a very specific location. The signal radiates and gets weaker the farther away you get from it. So as a result, what happens is even though the 2 tracks themselves are divided, the information radiates from one track to the neighboring tracks, whether it's 2-track or multi-track. And the result of that is that you get a little bit of what's called crosstalk between them. And so in the recording process on analog tape machines, a lot of effort was put into organizing the tracks in such a way that you would not have, for example, a click track or next to your bass track, or something like a tambourine next to your bass track, because that bleed would come through more audibly than having the bass, say, next to the kick drum, where they're both low frequency instruments and they generally mask each other. But you will always hear a little bit of this. What's interesting about this effect is that with working with Studio One software, you can apply it across the Mix Effects plugin slot. And when you do that, the crosstalk control will actually give you some crosstalk between different channels. And also it makes the controls more interactive globally. So when you work in other DAWs, the controls of each instantiation are independent. You also have master controls, and the master controls allow you to drive more energy. So if you really want to drive some distortion into something, then you can kind of push input and output levels as a way of driving extra saturation. So, and then you could turn the noise on or off, so you have a little control there. I'll leave it on for vibe's sake, and it's not that loud. And then you have a really cool feature here, which is the effect of the tape machine kind of starting up or stopping, which has a similar type of effect of vinyl without the clicks and pops. All right, so let's listen to a little bit of audio, and then I'll leave it bypassed here for a second, and then let's kind of get a vibe. Pop the tape machine in here. So this is at 30 inches per second. It's going to be the most hi-fi sounding. If you really pay attention to the focus or how it focuses the individual instruments, just kind of like almost like a lens that's kind of being turned and coming into focus on something. If you listen kind of from that perspective, if you can imagine it, then you hear the real effect, because otherwise it'll sound fairly transparent, especially here on the Studer type setting here. Helps the depth to kind of open up the separation. So I'm now going to go through the different tape types. So what you'll hear with the ATR is something that has a bit more richer low end, warmer top end, and then the C type, the sort of unknown here, as far as I know, they know what it is. This will give you kind of like a bright sound. So we'll kind of do a little quick comparison on the three. Let's see. Like a distinct characteristic between them, and what you get here is something that really helps to accentuate the low end, right? Adds like a nice warmth to the top end. This is like a little bit bright, really brings out the snare and the cymbals and some of that detail. This is probably the most balanced overall, and that's very typical of a Studer tape machine. But let's go with the ATR here, selection B. Now, you can actually drive this more or less for color, but before we do that, I just want to go over some of the different speed settings. What happens with the speed settings here, and you can see in the indication, is that you get more treble as you start to go here and less bass as you start to go up towards 30 inches per second. As you go down, your frequency response shifts a bit in the other direction, and you start to get more low-end energy and less high-frequency energy. So usually, it's interesting that they kind of label 15, they kind of highlight it and make that studio. In all of my years of, and many years of working with Studer tape machines and doing multi-track work and mixing to 2-track, I would say that probably 95% of it was working at 30 inches per second, and that was pretty much the professional standard everywhere that I saw. So there were people that would work at 15, and most of the time when people worked at 15, they were using noise reduction. The thing that makes it kind of cool here is there's the richness in the sound on the low end, which you get at 15, but in the actual real world, 15 inches per second would literally give you twice as much tape hiss, and 7.5 twice as much as that, which is 4 times what it is at 30 inches per second. So unless you're economizing or using noise reduction, a lot of people didn't use 15 inches per second for exactly that reason. So with that in mind, let's just kind of focus a little bit on the frequency response shift as we go through the different settings. So what's interesting about this in terms of that is that in a lot of the plugins, tape emulation plugins, I do gravitate towards 15 because there's a characteristic sound there which is better, and because you can extract the noise and they don't emulate that aspect of it. That's part of why that's highlighted there. So in getting that, so now we haven't even gotten into the variations that you get with going through all these different things. The amount here adds like a nice coloration so I can saturate more. And if I really want to drive some distortion here, I can back off on this end. And it works a little bit better on individual instruments than necessarily on a whole mix. But just to give you an idea. One thing I do really like about this plugin is that, you know, when this is up and just my natural gravitation towards this in terms of moving it up to a sound I was familiar with ends up with a VU somewhere right around 0. And there are very few tape emulations that actually do that. So this is like a major thumbs up for this particular one. In terms of the amount of saturation that I'm hearing and the way that the actual tape sounds based on the metering and the way that it looks. And so that's a big bonus to me. And I think if you were working and you're coming in at higher levels, you may want to bring your master levels down on the input so it generally registers this, you know, with a nominal amount, basically that you have here, and then balance out the top end, you know, for to get your or the output to kind of balance so you still have unity gain kind of driving through. So that's the basics of it. This sounds really, really good. I'm, you know, very impressed with the different emulations and the character of them all. It's not exaggerated. It actually seems very true to the components, although they don't tell you exactly what they are. But the way that the tape speed work and all of that, the quality of the tape compression characteristics and saturation characteristics is really cool. You can also oversaturate with the wet-dry control, which is kind of cool. I want to show you a couple of other features which are kind of fun. One is the run stop, which makes it, and then coming back up. And it's actually kind of fun. You can play around with this a little bit. Even, you know, if you're running a mix, the one thing you have to be conscious of, if you hit the stop and then you go on and then, you know, you do something else for a second, you come back and then you hear no audio. the stop will keep the audio kind of muted because the tape is not moving. So anyway, just a little thought. I ran into that once. So keep an eye out for that. You could always automate it if you wanted to do an effect. And it's also kind of cool because you can make a particular thing like all the music while the drum beat is still going on, drop down, and then come back up, and then you could just program with automation when that switch goes back and forth, which is kind of cool. So and the length of that will change based on the tape speed. So the slower the tape speed, the shorter that will be. The faster the tape speed, the longer that will be. There's no other way to control the length of it, but that's the basic idea. So whatever, maybe you want to end a song or start a song that way. That's one other option you have aside from the vinyl emulations that you might have. Another cool thing here, if you want to go have a little fun and go lo-fi with it, is that we can run a little bit of saturation in here with some noise, and then kind of maybe I'll not saturate so much. This can be actually a really cool effect on something like, like on that Rhodes or the guitar, if you're just kind of putting it in. And also because you have the wet dry control, you can kind of mix that in and blend that particular instrument in. So maybe I can just do kind of a quick solo on that. Just to kind of add like a little bit of movement kind of going on in the background. So that's like something you can have a little bit of fun with. And that's where the wet dry control in that type of situation works out really well. Or you run it in a send return and just keep it all the way wet. Otherwise, aside from some of those other basic settings here, let me kind of go to something that's a little bit more nominal in terms of the setup here. You also have a general trim. To add a little bit of high frequency energy. Or warm up a sound that's a little bit edgy. So maybe you like an aspect of the ATR over the Studer, but you miss a little bit of the air that you get with C. Maybe you can come in here and do that. Or maybe you like something about what you get in the low end with C, but it's too bright. You can warm it up a little bit. So it gives you some kind of control. This is not an unusual thing because there are playback equalization settings for high frequency and low frequency response. And so, this can kind of balance some of that stuff out. If you hear anything that's kind of close, but, maybe you want to kind of take a little bit off. And then there's the crosstalk control. Right, so you'll hear the increased energy in the center image. So it's somewhat like the equivalent of monoing it up. It's a little bit different though. Crosstalk does not happen equally at all frequencies in the spectrum. So lower frequency signals will exhibit more energy. Transient signals will also kind of cut through, although a lot of the higher frequency energy is sort of cut off. So this is not the same as just taking a balance control and kind of pulling it in so that a width control rather, I'm sorry, so that it's just making it less wide because there's a frequency dependent component to it. And that's part of why you notice that the kick drum really sticks out when you increase the crosstalk there, because this is just on the stereo mix bus. So it's taking the whole thing and just sort of pulling it in. But the basic aspects of it are there, and just so if you notice that's a main reason why that's happened. it's it's a frequency dependent thing, and that's really true to the original hardware. So just in case you thought that was just a width control, it's a lot more than that. Yeah, really great one. Really dig this. Just really smooth sound. Softube as always does a great job at emulating things. And their bass amp emulation, the Eden amp, the WT800, sounds ridiculous. I did a review of that just recently as well. And this is a nice follow-up to that, which is really great. So fantastic job all the way around by Softube. Really impressed by this one. I'm really a hard-nosed guy on tape emulations in particular, just because I've spent so much time working with a lot of the actual tape machines that have been emulated. So when I listen to them, I listen for characteristic things, and although I generally like to see all the different tape formulations and things that might be able to play around with, a great sounding emulation is a great sounding emulation, and this one rocks. So that's why it's the plugin of the week, Softube Tape.